Good evening, and welcome to tonight's deep dive. If you've looked at the global ticker today, you already know that the parameters of modern international relations just faced their sharpest pivot in a generation. For months, the international community had been operating under the assumption that a highly structured, multilateral framework was holding a fragile piece together. That assumption officially dissolved this morning. The comprehensive diplomatic blueprint, widely discussed across global policy circles as the definitive plan for regional stability, has formally fractured. Now, the phrase "botched deal" is already circulating across major networks, but to understand the real impact, we have to look past the immediate political talking points. This wasn't just a minor administrative disagreement or a sudden breakdown over a single clause. Policy analysts indicate that the systemic failure occurred due to deep-seated structural flaws within the verification protocols themselves. One side pointed to unmonitored baseline activities, while the other cited a complete failure to deliver the economic stabilization promised in the original text. The result is a total freeze in communication channels. Envoy teams have officially been recalled to their respective capitals, leaving a massive operational vacuum in one of the world's most critical economic corridors. For the domestic audience here in the United States, the fallout isn't just a distant foreign policy headache. Within hours of the formal cancellation notice, global maritime logistics networks began adjusting their routes away from vital shipping straits. When supply lanes become unpredictable, energy sectors react instantly. We are already seeing institutional investors adjust their risk profiles, signaling a highly volatile period ahead for consumer markets. But while the international defense sectors are scrambling to manage this new multipolar reality, the domestic political arena is preparing for an entirely different kind of theater. The breakdown of this framework has immediately ignited a fierce debate on Capitol Hill, with lawmakers using the failure to question the entire philosophy of long-term international treaties. Simultaneously, a massive political standoff is brewing right on the National Mall. Reports are surfacing of an unprecedented domestic maneuvering strategy, internally dubbed as a political war over the control and staging of symbolic national spaces, including the iconic reflecting pool. Political strategists and constitutional scholars are completely stunned as administrative factions clash over the weaponization of national symbols for upcoming campaigns. Is the era of grand, sweeping global accords officially over, or did the architecture of this specific arrangement doom it from the start? As the strategic war rooms in Washington reevaluate their positions, the line between foreign policy and domestic political spectacle has completely blurred. The chessboard is set, and the pieces are moving faster than ever. Stay with us as we prepare to unpack the full systemic collapse in our next segment. The fallout from the morning's diplomatic collapse has rapidly escalated from official statements to active behind-the-scenes maneuvering. As defense departments and intelligence agencies scramble to assess the damage of the fractured international accord, the economic and political ripples are hitting the domestic front much faster than anticipated. In the immediate wake of the framework's dissolution, emergency sessions have been called across European and domestic oversight committees. The core debate is no longer about saving the original text. That ship has officially sailed. Instead, the focus has shifted entirely to containment. National security advisors are warning that the sudden vacuum in oversight will inevitably lead to a rapid acceleration of unchecked baseline operations in the region. For the global energy sector, this uncertainty triggered a massive wave of algorithmic trading, causing commodity indexes to experience their most volatile trading hours since the start of the fiscal year. Supply chain logistics firms are already drafting contingency plans, bracing for prolonged reroutes that could impact consumer goods heading into the next quarter. But while international analysts track the shipping lanes, the political battle inside Washington has reached a fever pitch. The failure of the framework has provided immense leverage to domestic opposition factions, who are aggressively framing the botched deal as a fundamental failure of modern administrative strategy.
Rather than uniting in a moment of global instability, Capitol Hill has fractured into distinct tactical camps, turning a foreign policy crisis into a potent weapon for upcoming electoral campaigns. Simultaneously, the administrative standoff surrounding the National Mall has intensified. The dispute over the staging and control of the reflecting pool area has escalated from a bureaucratic disagreement into a full-scale symbolic war. Insiders report that executive strategists are attempting to bypass traditional city permits to set up a massive permanent media installation right on the water's edge, a move critics call a blatant politicization of sacred national ground. As local law enforcement, park services, and federal agencies clash over jurisdiction, the visual center of American democracy has become a literal battleground for optics. The boundaries between managing a global security threat and orchestrating a domestic political spectacle have completely disintegrated. As both crises deepen, the question is no longer who will blink first, but how much structural damage the system can take before a breaking point is reached. Stay tuned as we dive into the next phase of this unfolding alignment. We have officially reached the critical turning point where rhetoric hardens into permanent policy. The theoretical warnings issued earlier today have materialized into direct structural standoffs, leaving both international frameworks and domestic conventions hanging by a thread. On the geopolitical stage, the definitive line has been crossed. Intelligence dispatches confirmed that the formal monitoring equipment stationed along the disputed zones has been completely deactivated. Without verified data streams, the international community is flying entirely blind. In response, a coalition of maritime powers has just announced the deployment of an emergency naval task force to secure the shipping straits. The diplomatic failure is no longer a corporate talking point. It is an active operational deployment. Commodity markets have reacted by temporarily halting trading on key energy futures to prevent an absolute panic-driven collapse. For the average citizen, the reality of a fractured global agreement is about to reflect directly at the fueling stations and retail shelves. Meanwhile, the symbolic war on the home front has reached its absolute climax. The bureaucratic skirmish over the National Mall has exploded into a full-scale constitutional showdown. As evening fell, federal administrative teams moved heavy barricades directly around the perimeter of the reflecting pool, completely blocking public access under the guise of an emergency national security staging operation. Opposing legislative leaders have immediately labeled this a soft occupation of public space, designed purely to orchestrate an aggressive, high-production campaign backdrop. Legal scholars are frantically debating whether an executive faction can legally seize control of historic civil architecture for partisan media dominance. The image of the Washington Monument reflecting over a barricaded, locked-down pool has become the perfect, chilling metaphor for the current state of American governance, an iconic symbol of unity completely enclosed by tactical division. The chess match has turned into an open struggle for absolute leverage, with global supply chains fracturing and domestic landmarks transformed into fortified studio sets. The traditional systems of checks and balances are facing their ultimate stress test. The players have laid down their cards, the red lines have been drawn, and the fallout from this dual crisis is about to reshape the political landscape forever. Stay with us as we head into the final resolution.
As the immediate shockwaves of the day's dual crises begin to settle, Washington and the global community are shifting from a state of acute panic to a strategy of calculated stabilization. The lines have been drawn, the confrontations have peaked, and now the long process of managing this highly volatile new baseline begins. On the international front, the worst-case scenario of an immediate maritime conflict was narrowly averted.
Following the deployment of the Emergency Naval Task Force, a temporary de facto security corridor was established through the shipping straits. While formal diplomatic ties remain completely frozen and the original framework is officially dead, this practical maritime arrangement has successfully restored a baseline of predictability. Energy markets responded with a sigh of relief, with trading resuming and commodity prices pulling back from their historic morning spikes. However, structural analysts warn that this is merely a temporary band-aid. The permanent loss of the verification protocols means the international community must now permanently adapt to a highly fragmented multipolar defense strategy. Closer to home, the intense standoff over the National Mall has reached a complex, bureaucratic truce. Following a series of emergency injunctions filed by legislative leaders, the federal administrative teams were forced to dismantle the heavy perimeter barricades around the reflecting pool. Public access has been restored, but the political landscape remains fundamentally altered. The high-production campaign backdrops were forced to scale back, yet the incident successfully demonstrated a terrifying new playbook for the weaponization of public infrastructure and civil architecture for media dominance. The dust is finally settling, but the mechanisms of both global diplomacy and domestic politics have faced a profound structural evolution. The old rules no longer apply. As the markets adjust and lawmakers draft new strategies for the upcoming term, the events of this chaotic day will stand as a stark reminder of how quickly symbolic power and global security can collide. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Stay tuned to your local listings, keep your feeds locked, and we will see you next time.
The news cycle will inevitably move on to tomorrow's headlines, but the systemic transformation set into motion by this day's events will reverberate for years to come. We are no longer waiting for a shift in the global balance of power or the style of domestic governance. We are actively living in the aftermath of that shift. In the international theater, the definitive collapse of the comprehensive blueprint has forced an end to the era of grand, multilateral foreign policy. Diplomatic strategy has officially entered a hyper-focused, modular phase. Treaties are no longer built on decades of projected trust. Instead, they are executed as short-term transactional arrangements governed by real-time satellite data and strict economic metrics. For the global economy, this means a permanent embrace of structural agility. Supply chains are being systematically decentralized, and industries are learning to thrive inside a multipolar reality where stability is monitored hour by hour. Domestically, the symbolic war over the National Mall has permanently expanded the boundaries of political media strategy. The physical dispute over the reflecting pool may have concluded with a legal truce, but the underlying tactical theory has been validated. Future campaigns will no longer rely solely on traditional debate stages or standard press rooms. The new battlefield is the deliberate appropriation of historic civil architecture to project absolute authority. The image of national landmarks serving as high-stakes political backdrops is now a permanent fixture of the modern playbook. What this chaotic sequence of events ultimately proved is that our global and domestic systems are entirely inseparable. A tremor in a distant maritime corridor immediately accelerates the political machinery inside the nation's capital, just as a domestic struggle for symbolic dominance shapes how foreign allies perceive institutional strength. The immediate crises have been managed, the standoffs have cooled, and a new baseline has been established. The architecture of global and domestic strategy has evolved, and there is no turning back. Thank you for staying with us through this comprehensive analysis. Good night, and stay vigilant. As the immediate smoke clears from the week's intense standoffs, policy institutes and constitutional strategists are looking past the daily headlines to chart the long-term path forward. What we witnessed wasn't a temporary disruption, it was the birth of a brand new operating system for both global diplomacy and domestic governance. In the international sphere, the transition to modular diplomacy is already becoming institutionalized. Foreign policy teams are no longer drafting massive 100-page treaties designed to last a generation. Instead, the focus has shifted to hyper-specific regional economic pacts backed by automated monitoring technology. Defense analysts call this peace through verification metrics. If a supply line shifts or a data point blinks, the agreement automatically recalculates its terms. For major multinational corporations, this new baseline means building permanent institutional flexibility into their long-term investments, ensuring they can absorb sudden geopolitical pivots without halting production. Meanwhile, the domestic political landscape is rapidly adjusting to the new architecture of symbolic media dominance. The temporary physical barriers around the reflecting pool are gone, but the strategic legal frameworks created during that standoff are now being weaponized for future debates. Congressional committees are already drafting new legislation to permanently define the boundaries of executive authority over national landmarks and historic civil spaces. The goal is to prevent public infrastructure from becoming a permanent asset in partisan media campaigns. However, PR experts agree that the tactical shift has already occurred. The control of iconic backdrops is now seen as vital as controlling the policy narrative itself. Ultimately, these parallel developments have proven that resilience is the only viable strategy in a hyper-connected world. Whether managing the security of a global shipping corridor or defending the administrative neutrality of a historic landmark, the institutions that survive are the ones that can adapt in real time. The old frameworks have faded, the new boundaries are being drawn, and the playbook for navigating this highly calculated future is being written as we speak. Thank you for following this multi-part deep dive. Stay informed, stay analytical, and we will see you on the next broadcast.
The transition from crisis management to institutional reform is now officially underway, with the realization that the old international and domestic playbooks are permanently obsolete. Both global regulatory bodies and domestic legislative committees are rushing to establish permanent guardrails for this new era. On the international front, the temporary security arrangements in the shipping straits are being codified into a new type of maritime framework. Maritime coalitions, working alongside global trade organizations, have begun implementing a fully automated, data-driven traffic management system. By relying on neutral automated data nodes to track vessel movements and cargo manifest verifications, the system removes the human element of political posturing from trade logistics. This structural shift has successfully brought energy market fluctuations down to historic baselines, providing a predictable environment for global supply chains even in the complete absence of a formal diplomatic accord. Domestically, the legislative backlash to the symbolic staging crisis on the National Mall has culminated in a landmark regulatory push. A bipartisan coalition in Congress has introduced the Civil Space Protection Act. This comprehensive bill aims to permanently strip executive factions of the ability to unilaterally restrict public access to national landmarks for media production. The legislation establishes clear, independent judicial oversight for any temporary staging permits on federal ground, ensuring that historic spaces like the reflecting pool remain neutral symbols of civic heritage rather than tactical campaign assets. As these structural guardrails take shape, the true legacy of this turbulent period becomes clear. The dual crises did not destroy the systems of governance. Instead, they forced a massive, overdue upgrade.
By turning volatile flashpoints into opportunities for systemic reinforcement, the institutions of the modern world are demonstrating an unprecedented level of resilience, paving the way for a more stable and calculated future. Stay with us as we continue to track these systemic shifts. The story continues to evolve. While the halls of Congress and the war rooms of maritime coalitions are busy drafting codified rules, a parallel movement is taking place directly on the pavement. The true test of any institutional shift isn't just how the administrators react, it's how the public reclaims the spaces and systems that were temporarily taken from them. Over the past few days, a massive cultural countercurrent has swept through the nation's capital. In direct response to the heavy-handed tactical staging that briefly locked down the reflecting pool, grassroots civil organizations and independent artists have launched a series of unauthorized, completely peaceful public pop-ups. From open-air policy debates held on the monument steps to massive community art installations reflecting off the water, the public has effectively transformed a symbol of administrative gridlock into a hub of civic revitalization. Instead of being passive consumers of a highly orchestrated media spectacle, citizens are actively rewriting the narrative of what public infrastructure actually stands for. This public reclamation is having a surprising ripple effect on the global stage as well. International policy think tanks are noting that the resilience of domestic civil society is sending a powerful message of stability to foreign observers. When global markets see that a nation's foundational public spaces can experience an intense administrative crisis and seamlessly transition back into open, democratic utility, institutional confidence spikes. The automated shipping networks we discussed in our previous segment are reporting record-high efficiency rates, largely because the broader geopolitical anxiety has been completely defused by this display of systemic endurance. What began as a chaotic, high-stakes battle over media optics and broken treaties has ultimately triggered a profound cultural awakening. The guardrails aren't just being built by lawyers and automation algorithms anymore. They are being maintained by a public that refuses to let its national symbols be weaponized. As we approach the final chapter of this journey, the balance between institutional power and public resilience has never been more visible. Stay tuned for our concluding analysis. While the cultural and legislative shifts inside the domestic arena continue to play out, the strategic calculations of our closest international allies have taken a fascinating turn. The days when a domestic administrative crisis remained entirely separated from foreign policy objectives are officially over. Today, geopolitical analysts are tracking how the world's major coalitions are quietly adjusting their defense models to accommodate this highly fragmented landscape. From London to Tokyo, key diplomatic missions are no longer waiting for centralized directives out of Washington to anchor their security frameworks. Instead, a network of autonomous bilateral partnerships has begun to emerge. Rather than relying on a single, massive international treaty to protect vital shipping lanes or stabilize global consumer markets, regional powers are forging targeted, modular security alliances. This means that if an economic bottleneck or a sudden framework collapse occurs in one hemisphere, localized defense grids can instantly activate to maintain the flow of international trade without waiting for a broader global consensus. This systemic agility is structurally altering how institutional investors read risk across global markets. The realization that international infrastructure can remain resilient even when traditional diplomatic avenues are frozen has injected a strong wave of stability into commodity indexes. Intelligence dispatches reveal that while formal envoys remain quiet, the digital integration of automated trade logs between allied nations has reached historic highs. It turns out that the shift away from sweeping bureaucratic accords toward hyper-focused real-time data verification is creating a far more stable baseline than anyone had anticipated. As the international community learns to operate within this decentralized architecture, the primary lesson of the recent standoffs becomes undeniable. True institutional strength isn't derived from rigid, unyielding treaties or fortified political backdrops. It comes from the capacity to adapt, self-correct, and build structural redundancy into the systems that keep the modern world moving. The old paradigms of global diplomacy have officially receded, and the foundation for a highly practical, hyper-connected future is firmly in place. Thank you for following this extensive, multi-part investigative series. Continue to monitor the data, stay analytical, and keep your focus on the systemic shifts shaping tomorrow. Good night. You can review the original comedic breakdown and satirical analysis of these political and infrastructure events by checking out The Daily Show's coverage of the botched deal and reflecting pool drama, which provides the humorous foundation behind these complex media and policy themes.
As we wrap up this extensive, multi-part look at the current political horizon, it becomes essential to synthesize exactly how foreign strategy and domestic optics became so deeply intertwined. The ultimate lesson of these shifting administrative playbooks isn't found in the classified defense reports, but in the bizarre theater that bridges international friction with local spectacle. Consider the supreme irony of the modern administrative state. On one hand, policy architects are forced to manage high-stakes transitions away from rigid multilateral foreign pacts toward hyper-focused, data-driven regional frameworks. The collapse of the old diplomatic blueprints means defense capitals must operate with absolute technological precision just to keep basic commerce flowing through unpredictable shipping straits. The margin for error on the global stage has never been thinner, demanding maximum coordination and automated vigilance. Yet simultaneously, that very same institutional apparatus can look completely inward and exhaust its immense media energy on a domestic infrastructure crisis that plays out like pure satire. While international experts track multi-billion-dollar trade fluctuations, domestic operations find themselves completely consumed by the optics of public architecture, culminating in the literal and symbolic lockdown of historic landmarks over nothing more than aesthetic control, security overreactions, and bizarre administrative blame games. When a system spends its mornings managing highly volatile multipolar security operations and its evenings deploying heavy tactical barriers to protect a public pool from imaginary media vandals, the line between strategic governance and late-night satire completely dissolves. It proves that institutional power is a double-edged sword, highly capable of building automated resilience to secure global trade networks, yet equally prone to turning its own historic monuments into high-production partisan sets. The new reality is neither purely tragic nor purely serious. It is profoundly absurd. The systems that govern our hyper-connected landscape will continue to adapt, self-correct, and codify new rules. But as long as policy failures abroad are mirrored by theatrical optics at home, the script of modern politics will remain the ultimate dark comedy. Thank you for watching this complete strategic breakdown. Stay sharp, question the backdrops, and watch the tickers. Good night.